Tonight's guest is an intrepid author, a radio host, and publisher. He's a debater as well on the stage, representing his side of freedom versus mental slavery. His mind is an adhesive for facts, and his recollection of the facts on any given parameter in any given manner is impervious to hyperbole. As an evangelist for libertarian philosophy, he serves as the director of the Libertarian Institute, and he hosts the Scott Horton Show with over 6,000 interviews, where he's conducted interviews with experts on foreign policy, war, civil liberties. You might have also seen him intellectually body slamming his co-panelists on Piers Morgan, readily displaying for the audience his brand of intellectual self-defense. Please welcome back to Grand Theft World, Scott Horton. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me back. Great to be with you.
I forgot to sacrifice a Dr. Pepper to the technology gods before I started, so it's a good thing I prepare ahead of time. I'm so pleased that you could take a little time out of your schedule to meet with us, because you've had some really big ongoings lately. You've been kicking ass over on Piers Morgan. You recently did the debate with Dubowitz over on the Lex Fridman show, and then Lex allegedly he invited you back and you guys did some epic like 11-hour podcast, and then I just saw you last night with Dave Smith. So thank you for carving out a little time for the Grand Theft World audience. What has been like the most inspiring thing that's happened over the past couple weeks of your ever rising success?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. I think the best thing was the Tucker Carlson appearance. There was, I guess, kind of rumors that I might get on there last fall, potentially maybe after the election or something. And then that never did happen. So I was like, So I've been thinking a lot about how I wanted that to go. And I think that went about as perfect as it could have been expected. Me and Tucker made fast friends. Like as soon as I got there, he had me for dinner the night before and we got to hang out and all that. And then the next day was like, okay, we're going to start with 1953. And we're just going to go all the way through, and American, Israeli, Iranian policy, of course, with the poor Iraqis and Palestinians stuck in the middle of all of this and all of that. And then see if we can just plow right through. And then it just went exactly as I hoped it would be, basically. But that was the best one.
So you started with Operation Ajax, and I've always found that operation interesting because when you get into it, it was the Anglo-Iranian oil company that turned later into BP, British Petroleum. But that was one of the main corporate activities going on there. You had MI6 training a nascent CIA on how to do overthrows of democratically elected leader Mohammad Mossadegh. And I think Kermit Roosevelt was involved with that coup, if I remember back in the day. So there's a lot of interesting history that I started to learn about with that. And I'm really glad that you brought the audience past World War II to a clean spot to kind of start to demarcate the relationship between like the Anglo-American establishment and the Persian people over there in Iran. Mm-hmm. And what was challenging about doing Tucker's show that might be different than doing your average podcast?
Well, in a sense, like the hardest part was that I knew I was kicking on an open screen door, right? Like he was inviting me to go ahead and take us through it. I told him, I was like, look, I could sit here and sound like Dave on everything, basically, but like my comparative advantage is I can take you all the way through all the wars as one story in chronological order and show you the cause and effect all the way through. That's what I'm good for. And he was like, bet, let's do that then. You know what I mean? So then it was like, okay, I have to make sure that I don't leave out the important points, because it sucks when I go, oh yeah, you know what? Back 10 years ago, I should have mentioned this one thing, which I do have to do that a lot of times. But in this case, I think I hit every point that I needed as I was carrying forward. That way I could say, okay, remember 10 minutes ago when I told you about 1980? Well, these are the same guys now in 1991 that become a big deal. And then it's the same guys we see again in 2003. Now you see why it matters so much what happened in 91 and that kind of deal. So that's essentially what I'm trying to do is, hopefully in one shot, build in the audience's mind, essentially the same picture that I have of one big chain of stupid cause and effect of bad decisions people didn't have to make, but did anyway, all the way through. And of course, not just stupid, selfish and greedy and corrupt and horrible too, but also stupid all the way through.
Well, I think that what Scott, Charlie, and I all appreciate is that when you do have to double back, it's like a reinforcing stitch so that people don't get lost in the story. And they do know that there's a causal continuity between the events you're drawing together in the story for the hope that they will put it together and see a big picture.
Yeah.
And I know that's tough for you to do in 3 hours on Tucker Carlson's show. A lot of people think 3 hours is a long time, but when you're working with big pieces of history and you have detail and nuance and complexity to it, you don't want to cut certain areas short because then that hyperbolizes or it caricatures it.
Yeah.
And big ideas, adult ideas, sometimes need long form discussion, and you can't fit it in like a 20-minute soundbite. It's not
Right.
easy,
And especially when,
yeah.
these days, and I don't know exactly why it's like this. I guess just because all the lies of the media in our era, but maybe just times come and go where we go from kind of a more rationalist era to more of a romantic type of a time where people are less rational. But like, it just seems like no matter what you say, no matter who you are, no matter what you say, people immediately try to deconstruct it to figure out what corrupt reason is behind you deciding to try to lie and manipulate me by saying the thing you just said. Like everything has to be deconstructed as some kind of CIA plot or whatever. You know what I mean? Like every word is to be distrusted. So in that sense, then that's another reason why you need to hear me go on for a while so you can tell I'm not pulling punches against the Ayatollah any more than I'm pulling punches against Bill Clinton or George Bush. What I'm about is not about pulling punches against anyone. So like, if you're going to be mad at me when I pull punches against the guy that you hate a lot, well, you're going to be pleased with me because I won't do that. I actually am going to whoop his ass too. But you got to be patient because if you favor Bill Clinton over W. Bush and you hear me send Bill Clinton straight to hell, and then you decide that I'm not the same kind of guy as you, maybe, then just if you give me 5 more minutes, I'm going to get to W. Bush, and you're going to see how like, oh, actually, wow, he just explained why it's all George W. Bush's fault that Kim Jong-il decided to get nuclear weapons or whatever it is. And they can tell that I'm not bluffing. And they go, okay, well, and that's just, of course, the benefit of being a libertarian and being as anti-government as I am, that when I was a teenager, Bill Clinton was the president. So I never had to be a Republican or a Democrat or any of these things. You know what I mean? So I never had an allegiance toward either side that I ultimately had to choose against. Like I just was, raised in a libertarian town, I guess by leftists, but I never really became one of them. But the benefit, of course, of the leftists is they hate the Democrats. They have no loyalty to the liberal Democratic Party, which they figure is a part of a right-wing fascist plot or whatever. So, you know what I mean? So there's a immunity to that need to fit in with the dominant groups that I just never had that, you know what I mean? Just being like a George Carlin guy and just being a skateboarder or whatever. So it's just easy for me to be fairly against them all. Like I'm clearly biased, but it's a transpartisan bias against all rather than, the kind of thing that, in other words, if I make you mad for picking on your guy, I'm going to pick on everybody else too in a way that ought to at least feel fair to you. But sorry, I'm just saying, like you're saying,
I'm
it takes a while. It
biased
takes a while for
freedom.
people to feel that and get that part of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they don't get that it's supra-governmental or supranational. It goes across red-blue party lines,
Sure.
these stories. So to have an attachment to one team or the other and not step back and look at the whole thing, I think is the cartoonish caricature schoolhouse rock version that people cling to. And those assumptions are where they lose their agency and power and become victims.
Right.
And the way to get out of that is to start questioning things and finding answers and learning for yourself and developing your own perspectives. You mentioned you grew up in a libertarian town. What does that mean, and how do you define libertarianism?
Well, so I'm from Austin, which is, of course, a commie town, right? It's a liberal town, but in a very red state. So you can either be bad on everything or you can be good on everything, right? Like that's basically the deal. For me, like I grew up on the edge of Travis County. So either I'm going to be, for the warfare welfare state, or I'm going to be against them both, right? So I'm against them both. And, like on the Access Channel, we had Terry Liberty Parker, and there was a different guy named Gary Johnson, totally different guy, and other people who were, hardcore generational libertarians and Libertarian Party people and libertarian propaganda. So there's a lot of that you can see. Like, when I was a kid before the internet, I still remember actually the first time I saw a bumper sticker that said, "Enough is enough, vote libertarian." And I was like, oh, okay, cool, man. Some guy with a junky old brown car driving down Lamar who also hates them both. Like, cool. You know what I mean? Back then that was like a drink of water in the desert. That like, oh, okay, right. This is there are people out there who just aren't having it, and I'm with them, kind of thing. So, and then, but what does it mean? Of course, it's means that liberty is the highest political goal, right? As Ron Paul has always emphasized, that like this is supposed to be the North Star. Everything else from there is a deviation from true Americanism, which is real libertarianism: property rights, hard money, individual freedom, gold and guns and peace, right? Is the Jeffersonian way, only without the slavery part, you know? So,
well, I think if you're not allowed to own property, then you are owned property. So property rights delineate us from being slaves in a world of libertarian philosophy. Could you juxtapose the difference in your view, libertarian philosophy to libertarian politics? Because people don't know, they just think it's all one thing, and there's a very distinct difference.
yeah, well, I mean, the Libertarian Party has its qualities and it has its drawbacks. It's sort of a clubhouse for kooks in a way that is detrimental to the overall goal. It's true that, well, just like as I was saying with that bumper sticker, a lot of times that's just people's first introduction to even the concept would be a third party, right? They're like, okay, well, it's a libertarian, sounds sort of like liberal, but it has a different ending on it. So why? Or something, you know what I mean? Like it's supposed to be interesting at that point. People got to figure that out. And then it turns out like, oh, these guys are seemingly very right wing on things like gold and guns and property and the Constitution and stuff like that. So what exactly does that mean then? And then, so to me, and I guess I've kind of always been like this, but I especially like learned this driving a cab for so many years and talking to so many people that like, if you can get them confused for the right reason, then there's an opportunity for real enlightenment there, right? So, you know, well, that's the Rothbard article, Confessions of a Right-Wing Liberal, right? So why would a right-winger be so much more liberal than the liberals in the proper sense of that term, and in a meaningful sense of that term? You know what I mean? Or like one example would be, I remember messing with people on election night in 2000, or in the run-up to the election of 2000. And I would say, I hate Al Gore. He's a right-wing fascist. And then I would go through how he's all bought and sold by the oil companies and the military-industrial complex. And he's this right-wing nationalist who's for centralizing all power in Washington and all that. And I say, and I hate George Bush, the Republican, because he's such a commie. And then I would talk about how he's, with Ted Kennedy and he's a compassionate conservative, which means he wants to expand the welfare state and more centralized control of education and more, global do-gooderism around the world and policing the world and all these things. And that's what makes him a socialist. And people in the cab would go, oh, I see what you did there, cabbie. You know what I mean? We're like, there's real truth in both of those things, even though obviously they're supposed to represent the opposite side of that. Like, what do those terms really mean anyway? It means they're evil statists trying to take all our freedom away and send all our boys off to war and all of those obvious things when you stop and think about it, and especially at a time like that where Bush and Gore were just clones of each other and agreed with each other on every single point of policy, basically, and only, seemed different in the most superficial way at that time. But that's just the kind of example. That's the kind of thing I like to do, is get people interested in, like, well, for the obvious thing, why would same thing for the whole libertarian movement. Why would a bunch of like middle and or upper middle class white guys who are for gold and guns be so rabidly anti-war and anti-imperialism? And then the answer is, right, it ain't because we're hippies, but it's just because we're smart. It's because we've read all this stuff and we understand what's really going on here. And we know that you all know it too. It's the military-industrial complex, man. It's a conflict of interest all the way around to keep this thing going. All the foreign lobbies and all the arms salesmen and all the rest. It's just, we know that story so well, you can't get us to change our mind about it. We're really against it. We're going to stay that way. Can't have a free market and a limited government when you have a world empire. So we're the ones saying you have to choose, and you should follow us in choosing the right way on that.
For those old enough, I think your delineation between Bush and Gore is right on, because in either case, like, they're participating in making sure that the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto are strongly upheld in this country. And they're working on a picture that's bigger than protecting our rights, which is the only legit form of government, is to protect our rights, not to keep us safe, but to protect our rights so that we can keep ourselves safe. You know, if we all have the right to self-defense and to practice non-aggression and intellectual self-defense so we can keep away from propaganda and lies, I think we stand stronger, and we could stand diversified, decentralized, but stand strong as autonomous individuals better than their interchangeable parts, because it's the same thing that led to interchangeable presidents. You're right. It doesn't make a difference which side gets into office. The military industrial globalist complex is still going toward world domination, and it's a big club, and we're not in it, like Carlin used to say.
Yep. And of course, you do have the 1/10, the 1% who are the biggest investors and the biggest hedge funds and banks and whatever that control this and that. But also in the executive branch, remember, as we all, hopefully if they told us anything in government school, we all know there's just the one elected member of the national executive branch, the president himself. And everybody else is an appointee and or just a hireling. And so when people talk about the deep state, like, let's just define that down. Government employees. That's what that means. And so when you have this big of a government, that means you have that many government employees. And those government employees have their interests. And you can see the outrage. I saw a thing where there were a bunch of layoffs in whatever few departments, and they're screaming, holy hell, like the American people owe them an obligation. They have a right to a government job and to tax money to keep them employed at wages above what they can make in the market, doing the same thing. And to them, that's what a right is, something that the government is supposed to give you, including a government job. And they just have the whole system. Their understanding of how it's supposed to be is completely turned on its head. They've never had it explained to them before. They're like, well, you guys all are supposed to be essentially temporary workers until you solve the problems the people elect you to solve. And then you solve those problems and then you go get a real job. Otherwise, what are we, they don't understand that that's even supposed to be the concept, right? To them, it's all just, and so when a president, you look at what happens when Donald Trump comes, you could see him as a virus, and they are the mRNA vaccine, man, kicking in to prevent him, well, especially in his first term, to, inoculate the government, to prevent him from being able to infect it and control what it will do. As they said about his Russia policy, the president is like the captain of a ship. He's holding the wheel, but it's not attached to anything. And that's because the interagency, meaning, right, the deputies committee, the consensus of the regime, they have decided what our policy will be, and they're not going to let him change it. In fact, they impeached him over it. And Alexander Vindman, who was the original rat and who testified against him, said repeatedly under oath and in his articles that the reason he did all this was because Trump was trying to change foreign policy. And who the hell does he think he is to tell the government? Let me tell you something. The United States of America already has a Russia and a Ukraine policy. The president was trying to change it. And here, this Ukrainian American, who Trump doesn't have the wisdom to kick off his National Security Council, has decided he's just going to overrule the president of the United States because he don't like it. And it's him and 10 million more like him. And, it sounds funny, but like, it sounds maybe like the limited hangout. But to me, like, that's the conspiracy. It's the state itself, right?
When you say 10 million, are you referring to people under national security contract obligations not to tell us the truth?
I don't know. I was just making up a number. It's a hell of a lot, though. I could check on that. It's a hell of a lot. I had in my mind 8 million at least national. I think that's a number that was disclosed a couple years ago, because there are a lot of people who aren't allowed to tell us the truth. And sometimes they work in corporations, and sometimes they work in governments, and sometimes they work in intel agencies and all these sort of things. So I just didn't know if there was a source or a reference for that number that I needed to pick up on or update on. But you made it up. Good job. Nope. Yeah. Everybody look into that independently of each other and make sure that I'm right.
Hey, what's the difference?
Yeah, it's something like that.
What's the difference between the mafia and the government?
Size.
The mafia doesn't have a 12-year indoctrination program to convince you it's not the mafia.
Right.
The government does.
That's so funny.
Charlie and Scott, do you guys have any questions for Scott Horton at this point?
I just have a funny scenario in my head that you're trying to get a cab from a hotel to the airport. And
and you're stuck with this guy.
25 years ago, and Scott Horton picks you up, and you wind up getting a world-class education on the Middle East and still get there in time to catch your flight.
That's funny. We talked about, I don't know if you guys remember, there used to be a show on HBO called Taxi Cab Confessions, where it was people, it was always in LA or in Vegas, And it was people talking about their sex lives and funny stuff like that, right? So we had the idea. We never followed through in it because I never had any money. But the idea was at the time, we put the secret cameras in my cab, but then the video would just be me lecturing the people in my cab about the upcoming war on terrorism.
Yeah.
And the Federal Reserve and how it's all a big .com bubble and it's about to pop. Because that was what I was always lecturing everybody about in 97 through 99 during that time.
Well, now would be the time.
Too bad we don't have that. Can you imagine? That'd be great.
I'm just saying, right now,
smoking weed with a long hair, telling people it's a .com bubble, dude. Ron Paul says it's a bubble, like before the housing bubble even, you know?
I think right now is the best time to produce a show like that. Taxi cab red pilling, right? Something like that. Oh my God.
There you go.
It's really, no, there's something there. That's genius.
Charlie, you've produced shows, right?
Yeah, well, we were doing home renovation shows, so it's a little different, but I think
to script something like this, because the concept, each episode would have some sort of illustrated point that the audience finds out through listening to the taxi cab driver, and then we just have to mimic somebody in the back seat asking honest questions, and then you've got a whole dialogue script right there, and you could put that together pretty easy.
No, I think you should do it candidly, like get real people in the back seat and just start red pilling them and
do it live. Do it live in Austin. That could be funny, dude.
Problem is, then we need lawyers to make sure to have a.
It's kind of like
you sell the idea. Look, you can sell the idea to Netflix, Roku, Amazon, whomever. You pitch you have to find a production company, and I could introduce you to production companies that do that. You find a production company, they buy into your idea, they go get the legalities and the contracts, and then they send you out with your schedule to do your thing.
Do they let you smoke weed in cabs anymore?
In Austin, probably. Yeah,
depends on how you define let.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they might.
I kept getting in trouble because they made us put cameras in the cab, but then I would just cover mine up because I wanted to get high all day. What am I going to do? Drive around and not get high all day?
Were you a cab driver in Austin?
Yeah.
Oh, right on.
I'm like, it was 97 through 05.
Right on. I don't think I ever took a cab. I wasn't in Austin back then to take a cab. I thought maybe you were like a New York City cabbie.
No.
Every now and then you get some cabbie trying to tell you something. They listen to Rush Limbaugh or whoever they were listening to, maybe even Alex Jones back then, and they try to tell you some stuff and you'd be like, that's a great story, dude, but I gotta go get out of the car now.
Man, I had the coolest cab driver in Baltimore one time who just went off about Edgar Allan Poe and gave me the ultimate Edgar Allan Poe history of Baltimore cab ride that you could possibly imagine. It was so dope. Should have filmed it.
When did you stop being a cab driver? Like when you were cab driving and you had these ideas already, like were you doing interviews yet? Were you doing podcasts yet? Were you writing yet? Or was this like the nascent seed that sprouted through some other action we didn't talk about yet?
Yeah, no, I was already a talk radio head before I ever started driving a cab. And then let's see. Yeah. So I started driving a cab in 97. So my first radio show on Free Radio Austin was in 98, 99. And
is that when you started counting your interviews?
Well,
or did you start later in backfill?
I only did actually 2 interviews on Free Radio Austin. They were both of David Thibodeau, the surviving Branch Davidian, in 98 and 99, or maybe it was 99 and 2000. I forget. Only one of them survives and only part of it, but it's in my archive now. Somebody had it somewhere. And then I didn't really start doing the interview show. I was still doing pirate radio on Free Radio Austin and then on Chaos Radio Austin. But I didn't really start the interview show until April of 2003. So it was, I think, 3 days after they pulled down the statue in Baghdad. And I interviewed Alan Bach from antiwar.com. So I think that was when I really started the interview show and started counting them up then. And so, yeah, it's been almost 6,200 since then.
That's a lot. All right. So my question for you, being a skater and a radio host back in the day, what is your favorite movie? Is it Pump Up the Volume or Gleaming the Cube? Which Christian Slater movie were you back in the 90s? Man, you had them both right there, skateboard and radio, pirate radio.
No, I mean, look, what am I going to say, dude? It's got to be Gleaming the Cube. With Tony Hawk as the pizza driver coming over the hill. Like, yeah, that was dope.
They had to rebrand that later as a Brothers Justice, I think. That was them. It got a name title change later for marketing or something like that.
Okay. I remember something about that, or they tried to. But yeah, it's great because he switches off whether he's Rodney Mullen or Mike McGill or whoever at any different times. Like all of a sudden he's goofy footed and then all of a sudden he's regular footed. I think mostly McGill was his double. But there's a bunch of really great skateboarders in there and some pretty good skateboarding too.
All right. So now we know that Scott favors Bones Brigade over pirate radio stuff. Because I didn't skateboard. I had a gravel driveway. So I liked Pump Up the Volume. I was like, I want to do pirate radio someday. That looks cool. That's edgy.
Oh, I'm all about that too. Yeah, no, it was great.
But I didn't have a real reason.
There's a great episode of Malcolm in the Middle like that too, where he finds his old pirate radio equipment in the garage and he like sets it up in his car, starts driving around the neighborhood ranting and stuff. That's me, man. And then look, at that time, the idea was, I don't really want to get a bunch of attention where people know my face and name out in the world, dude. But I want to get this stuff off my chest. So I'm going to do pirate radio with my punk rock drunken friends and just hang out, drive my cab, stay off the grid. And then eventually I just figured out that like I actually don't have any other skills other than delivering auto parts or driving people home from the airport and this kind of thing. So I better like get my act together, figure out how to at least afford my cheeseburger budget and keep going, you know?
Have you ever been on the Punk Rock Libertarians podcast?
Yes, I have a couple of times.
All right. Cool. Me too. All right. At this point, I want to make sure that we're sensitive to like your large body of work. You've not only done like the 6,000 interviews, but could you go over briefly for the audience the order of the books you've written thus far? Because they keep getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah. So the first one is Fool's Errand about Afghanistan, which actually started out as the other book, Enough Already, about the Middle East. But what happened was when I got to chapter 2, I sort of got bogged down in the Afghan quagmire and was unable to wrap the thing up until I realized, okay, I'm already at 50,000 words and I'm not to Iraq yet. I guess I'm going to have to go ahead and make it just a book about Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So then when I finished that, I didn't start right away, but I should have, and basically went back and did Enough Already is the rest of the book on the Middle East. And then I tried to put it off. I knew I had to do it, but I wanted to deny that for a long time. But I finally started writing the Russia book at the time of the start of the war, although had some interruptions there, but basically took about 2 years to write Provoked. So it's the Fool's Errand on Afghanistan, Enough Already on all the terror wars, and then Provoked is about the new Cold War with Russia and the catastrophe in Ukraine. And I published 2 more books that are collections of interviews. One of them is the great Ron Paul, 29 interviews that I did with him between 2004 and 2019. And then a speech that I gave about how much I love the guy. And then Hotter Than the Sun, which is a friend of mine just came to me and goes, look what I did. And it was a PDF of a whole bunch of interviews that I've done over the years, all about nuclear weapons. And so that one's Hotter Than the Sun, Time to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, but it's, you know, and I have to say, like for a book of interview transcripts, it's pretty good. Although I admit I'm annoying that like I'm in every interview, right? So you like get tired of this guy, which is fair, but like everybody else that in the book is awesome. So I got all these different scientists, all about how nukes work and all the differences and this and that. All about all of the nuclear weapons programs, the United States, Russia, China, North Korea, Israel, India, Pakistan, all of that stuff. The potential for their use and Mordecai Vanunu and whatever. And then the whole thing about Hiroshima and Nagasaki and all the anti-nuclear activists around and all the different doctrines for first use and how North Korea is all W. Bush's fault and all of that stuff is in there too. So,
do you discuss the Samson option in there?
No, I'm afraid not. I don't think you know what? Actually, that's not right. I have done an interview about that before, but not with Seymour Hersh. But I think I have talked about that on the show with somebody. But no, you're right. That's not in the book. That should be.
Is Cy Hersh still
I still
alive?
know Hersh, man. I'd have to. I have that book. I'd have to go back and reread it because I read it when I was like in the 1990s when I was a teenager still or something.
I bet he.
No, that's not true. It must have been in the W. Bush years.
He'd love to talk to you. I bet you were just on Tucker. You know what I'm saying? Like for Cy Hersh to be able to talk with you about that and do that interview, that can be timely right now.
Yeah, I know Hersh too. He's a good dude. He likes me. We've been around for a while, you know, talked for over the years. So
now a lot of people have the ability to publish books and a lot of people read books, but who are some of the interesting people, like maybe in the Army, that have been reading your books lately? Because you're becoming a well-known authority whose work is thoughtfully crafted in a factual direction. And even military leadership is having to take a Scott Horton hat tip right now and be like, thanks, dude. We're getting a big picture over there, you know, to see how it works.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited about that. I mean, I've heard for years about people passing around Fool's Errand and Enough Already on military bases and reading it. And You know, sometimes officers are like, you know, non-commissioned officers, like, you know, sergeants and whatever, ordering their men to read it, stuff like that. So I hear, you know,
Well, I thought I heard you
sometimes.
mention last night on Dave Smith that you were mentioning in the journal that they all read. Like the
I
journal
guess.
reviewed your book, which is a pretty big deal for books like yours. It's more important than the New York Times reviewing your book. These are people who specialize in warfare, global warfare. And now they have to look at your perspective because enough other people are looking at things from your perspective. They at least want to integrate it, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a serious piece of work that you've created over a series of blocks, right? You're building a foundation, but now those people have to take into consideration. And this generation of officers, I would think, are like looking for that type of fresh water.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
So what you're talking about is the journal is Parameters, which is the
Yes.
journal of the Army War College. And so, yes, I mean, it's the audience, its subscription base is the Army Officer Corps around the world. That's who reads it. And then I was told that that review was the second most downloaded review they've ever done after Bloodlands by Timothy Snyder, which is, of course, a huge book, right? Like the fact that I would be even in the same paragraph as that in terms of like readership and attention from that audience is a pretty big deal right there. And of course, you know, like, I didn't write the book to pander to the military in any way, but also I'm not a leftist. I'm clearly a Ron Paul guy. And I explain at the beginning, all of my alternatives to doing it this way are doing it Pat Buchanan's way and Ron Paul's way and Jeane Kirkpatrick's way on her best day. And so it's not let's move left at all. It's let's be conservative. And as H.W. Bush would say, but not do, be prudent, conserve what we've got and hang on to the best of what we've got and not blow it, you know?
I can only think of Dana Carvey. Wouldn't be prudent. Remember
Right.
his H.W. Bush impressions back in the
And,
day?
you know, I saw where he got all mad when Bush died and people were trashing Bush and he tried to stick up for Bush. And I was like, dude, he doesn't even really know. But if you Google that and look, the most prominent use of that phrase that Bush Sr. did when he said that was it would not be prudent to lift the global blockade against Iraq at this time, at the end of the war. The blockade stays until Hussein is gone, even though, he's 56 and he's not going anywhere. You know, I made up that age, but right around there, right? 1991, he wasn't going anywhere, dude. And they knew it. That was, it wouldn't be prudent. It wouldn't be prudent to stop starving these people to death. Why? Because then you won't be able to motivate a terrorist and knock our goddamn towers down. Got to stay in Saudi Arabia somehow, for some reason.
Well, and he was really close with Bandar Bush, and there's a whole Saudi proxy discussion there. I also, when you mentioned Jeane Kirkpatrick, there's the Kirkpatrick doctrine, and that was one of the things that led to working with the Mujahideen. Are you familiar with describing like the doctrine?
If you're talking about
her
important national interest piece about it's okay to back right-wing authoritarians as long as it's against communists.
Yeah, and you can use propaganda and psychological warfare and a whole bunch of other techniques to bring about those ends. And then I don't know if she said that before or after Operation Cyclone, but
yes, it was in the 70s. It was in the late 70s that she wrote that. So it's interesting, by the way, that, you know, in that debate with Mark Dubowitz on Lex Friedman's show, he got all defensive and tried to deny that Jeane Kirkpatrick was a neoconservative. And I was saying, well, yeah, in fact, I cited her as an example of neoconservatives who aren't Jewish, because he was trying to say, oh, man, you just hate Jews, which is not true, because I was picking on the neoconservatives.
And that pertained to the hour that Lex cut out, right?
It wasn't quite an hour. And in fact, let me talk about that in just 1 second.
Yeah, for sure.
He was saying that, since you're criticizing the neoconservatives, that means you have a hang up on Jews, which is really, he's signaling to his fans that you don't have to listen to this guy. He's just a hater, even though, because I just dropped science on their heads for 4 hours. Now what does he get left to do, right? And so now he has to try to, you know, smear me in that way. And I was explaining that, look, man, lots of neoconservatives are not Jewish. For example, Jeane Kirkpatrick and James Woolsey are Presbyterians, and Michael Novak, and I forget now, William Bennett, and a lot of those guys were Catholics. Then you have Zalmay Khalilzad is Muslim, and Francis Fukuyama's a Buddhist. And like, just because you used to be a communist and then you moved right to become a Reaganite with Norman Podhoretz and the guys, doesn't mean, and you could still be very, very Zionist. Doesn't necessarily make you Jewish, and it doesn't mean that to criticize neoconservatism has anything to do with a hang up against Jews. That's just a poor coping mechanism and excuse by Mark Dubowitz to make. But then he tried to deny that Kirkpatrick was a neocon on the basis that she didn't always put democracy first, which is, as you were just saying, she was saying, no, authoritarianism is preferable to communism as long as it's the right-wing kind, keeping communism at bay. We'll worry about democracy some other day, kind of thing. And whereas neoconservatives are supposedly obsessed with democracy first and spreading democracy first, which is actually really not true, right? They're obsessed with using that as an excuse to get America to go to war to destroy Israel's enemies. That's an entirely different topic. And besides, there are plenty. I mean, the neoconservative movement is probably right around 100 guys, and they disagree about lots of things. They sure work together pretty well a lot of times, but they also disagree. Like, for example, in 2013, Robert Kagan said, hey, man, the Muslim Brotherhood won the elections of 2012 in Egypt fair and square after all we've said about democracy here. And by the way, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt was like a bunch of old men, property owners and wealthy golfers and doctors and stuff, not a bunch of bin Ladenites like in Syria, for example. And so Kagan said, they won. Let's let them have their shot. Well, Frank Gaffney was like a hydrogen bomb going off over his head and was like, no way, let's invade Egypt, right? Like, you can't let the Muslim Brotherhood have power anywhere ever, no matter what. And so you're going to say Frank Gaffney wasn't a neocon just because of that? No, he just disagreed on one thing. But Jean Kirkpatrick literally had been from the Social Democrats USA and the Young People's Socialist League. Then she moved right with Norman Podhoretz, wrote for Commentary Magazine with that whole crew, and then joined the Reaganites. And so, like, this is, if there's such a thing as a neoconservative, it's her. There's, you know what I mean? You could say that, okay, well, she wasn't Jewish and from Brooklyn and didn't go to City College in New York, or you could say that she favored democracy sometimes, but not always. But those are differences without the distinction. Those don't make her not a neoconservative. So I just thought it was funny the way he tried to protest that, oh, she doesn't count. And it was like, well, I don't know, man. She's a friend of NPOD, you know? So like.
Yeah, I mean, neoconservative party is, it's a misnomer because there's a lot of Marxism, socialism, communism behind. And Jean Kirkpatrick had an interesting relationship with that because her husband was in the OSS and her mentor was also in the OSS. Let me see if I can find his name. But she went to Barnard College. She was later on National Security Council, ambassador to the United Nations. But Franz Neumann. So here's Marxism, OSS, and Zionism kind of all coalescing in her mentorship. Then she got set up with a guy who was also friends with Neumann, who was in the OSS back in the day. And so there's other layers to the neoconism, right? It's not the entirety of it, but there's a seed in there that is not American property rights and libertarian philosophy. It's more international communism and socialism. And it's being precipitated by a group that's supranational, and they're not all of one race, religion, color, or creed, but they do crave power, and they did coalesce around a plan to get it done, and they've been eroding our rights for a long time. We go back to the Federal Reserve just for one quick, easy stop, like just removing our ability to print our own money and putting us in debt to some mysterious international bankers that we owe $40 trillion to, who might also have stolen nuclear weapons and created their own country at one point. I don't know all that history. I didn't get it in school. Those 15,000 hours didn't give me that part. But your tutelage through your books and through your podcast and through your interview appearances are severely effective in this market because people are looking for answers, especially since COVID, bro. Like, we were yelling in the woods, you know, screaming into the wilderness until COVID. And then people were like, what's going on here? And they start asking questions. And there's a variety of ways to get people outside the standard narrative using official documents, evidence, artifacts, things like this. But I think your debate style also needs to be highlighted because it's effective and it's entertaining. And I think Piers Morgan might know that. So
Thanks.
When did you start debating? Is this something you've developed and kind of like crafted over 20 years? Or did you just pick it up like 5 years ago? Or like, when did it start?
Well, I actually, because I come from pirate radio, I had a problem with interviewing the bad guys. And the first few times I interviewed the bad guys, I think like 3 in a row, they would say, when I'm calling the FCC on you, I'm going to tell on you. I know my friend Jimmy works at the FCC and I'm going to get you in trouble. And so then I was like, oh, crap. I'm not trying to get all my friends in trouble. And they're not even doing political shows, man. They're just drinking Lone Star and playing punk rock and stuff. And like, I don't want to ruin, chaos. So I decided, well, what the hell? The war party gets to have their say all day anyway. I'll just interview the heroes about what they're doing and try to, do this side of it. So, but then my show was always a lot of me ranting and raving, plus a lot of interviews too. So just me explaining everything was practice enough. And just working at antiwar.com and being the assistant editor there and putting all the links in Justin's articles and all of that. So then I think the first debate I did was right before the election of 2008 at Texas A&M against a junior ranking neocon named Harvey Kushner, who I had never heard of before or since, but he was like Family Matters for America or something. And he was like a member of some kind of commie group that moved right. Like he was a card carrying neocon, just like sub Gaffney, but like out there somewhere. But anyway, so I kicked his ass, man. He refused to shake my hand at the end because it was so bad. Because I talked about how Israel had played such a key role in the rise of Hamas in the first place to divide and conquer the Palestinians, and he didn't like that. So that was a good one. I remember, I'm pretty sure I screwed up and forgot what I was talking about in the middle of my first answer. So I smoked a big joint right before the thing. But then I recovered after that and did okay after that. And then since then, geez, I went a long time without doing any more debates after that, I think. Bill Kristol might have been the second debate I ever did, man. There could have been one more.
That was at Gene's spot at the Soho Forum. What's it called?
Yes. Yeah, Gene Epstein. The Soho Forum. That was in October 21. I took on Bill Kristol. That may have been my second debate. And then since then, it's like a lot of zero hedge debates on Zoom and that kind of thing. You know what I mean? Arguing on Pierce Morgan and all that. And then, I mean, the real thing is actually that, like, I'm glad you like it, but I know I come on too strong, that I am too childish and I do not suffer fools at all. And I'm like, I can't hold it in when somebody's lying. I'm just dying to interrupt and go and whatever. So I'm probably too aggressive. I know it turns off people a lot of the time too, but I hope that it does set an example that just for people who are just total strangers out there who have no idea what they're looking at, and they see someone on Pierce Morgan saying, that's not true, and then saying, but this is what's true, and having a detailed refutation, that like, I hope that makes an impression on them that like, oh, he didn't just say give peace a chance. He said that the case for conflict here is a bunch of crap and you'd be a damn fool to believe it. And I hope that people get it. They're like, oh, okay, there's something to sink your teeth into here, man. This is not like, let's make a magic wish and try to get along. This is like a substantive refutation of the case for conflict, which is, after all, they lie about everything. So if you know anything about it, you ought to be able to do a pretty good job of explaining why it just isn't true. And as I know, they have to lie. I mean, Mark Dubowitz sat there and lied that whole debate long because that's all he could do. Oh, Iran blew up the Khobar Towers instead of Osama bin Laden, and on and on and on, because that's all he's got. What's he going to do if he's got to make a case based on the truth? He's going to have to say, look, dude, just pay up, all right? What? He's out of excuses. He's got nothing else to say.
When we were kids, what was the commercial where the bull was going through? Do you remember that commercial? It was like a bull in a china shop thing. Anyway, I think your bull in the china shop mentality is welcome because it's the intellectually evolved form. It's more refined than what Alex Jones did with, you take our guns, it'll be 1776, right? Like you can do that for hours at a time in a slower expansion that actually adheres to people and gives them something to take instead of just something that's like shock value, right? But you also know that you have to get people's attention in order to exchange words to have a holding of their interest. You have to get their attention first. And like, I'm glad you didn't pull any punches with Emily Austin when you're like, well, he died in 1989. And it was just like a mic drop record scratch moment. And I saw all these podcasters take that clip and then they're introducing more people to your work, and then they can find out about the substantial, meaningful things that you said in your retort other than that. But knowing how to compose those parts together to give peers as producers what they need to get people to watch the longer form piece. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Very eloquent on your part.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. I honestly, I'm always very self-conscious about it. Like, all I can do is just be myself, and I can hardly contain my rage anyway. So like, it is what it is. But I'm glad that you're not only just plucking your tongue at me. There are definitely times where I go too far. Like in the debate with Lex Friedman, I really do wish I had handled that better. And in fact, at the very beginning, even just the ground rules were, let's all try to be friends and get along and have a nice discussion here. And I should have said right then, actually, no, this is just business. And quite frankly, I despise this man. And I know that he's going to sit here and lie for the next 5 hours. And I'm going to sit here and tell you why everything that he says is not true. So go ahead, liar, and let's get this thing started. And just because what am I going to do in that situation, man? I'm stuck in a room with Mark Dubowitz. That it's going to come out like that. That is how it's going to be. He's going to lie. And then I'm going to say, here's why you don't have to agree with his conclusion, because all of his premises are false. You know what I mean? Like, that's how I'm going to deconstruct his case here. But then the thing is, that's a very adversarial thing to do. So then the point is and I knew this, and I said this out loud to my friends, and I said it to myself too, that like, be cool while you cut this guy's guts out. You know what I mean? And unfortunately, I can't do that. You know what I mean? Like the role model there, especially in that particular circumstance, to me would have been like Lou Rockwell, where the guy is cool, calm, and collected and serious as hell. And you know that he's going to not pull a punch. He's going to say something mean, but he's going to say it at a reasonable decibel where you go, wow, can't believe he said that. Instead of me going, rah, where you go, of course he said that because it matches my tone so well. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think it's just a phase in your growth process right now. And if you didn't have the courage, yeah. And I consider you my junior because I'm 2 years older. If you couldn't even sit at my lunch table if we were in high school, bro.
That's true.
They'd hassle you. So yeah. I consider this like, this is part of your important growth phase, because going into the Lion's Den on Lex Fridman and kind of going against the grain with the host wants is like warm and fuzzy, comfortable YouTube, right? Content. And you're like, no, this is business, and these people kill people, and they've been killing people for a long time. They've been using our money to do it, and they've been lying to us and bribing and blackmail. There's a whole bunch of things going on. And yeah, you're in there to be a man and to help other people live up to the responsibility in their lives too, with better, cleaner, fresher, factual information than what they've been getting, so they can make better decisions, choices, and judgments. And that fully affects our freedom. So yeah. I like the seriousness with which you approach your craft, because it's not something that was taught to us in school. In fact, it's very antithetical to what they indoctrinated us in school. And so really it's about you becoming your own man and standing your own ground and knowing who you are and what you represent, and knowing that these other people, yeah, they're lying because they're weak. They're on the intellectual, moral low ground. We shouldn't go roll in the mud with pigs, but we should maintain our high ground in a calm, cool, collected manner, because we know we are honest and genuine in bringing facts to our audience.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your kind words, man. I'm trying. But I do think, I give a lot of credit to all the great people who set an example for me, that like, you do not have to sit still in a world full of bullshit, man. Get out there and tell them what's true. You know what I mean? And in fact, like, I wouldn't put this on anyone else, but I see it as my responsibility. If I can see right through liars' lies, then I'm going to I kind of owe it to other people to explain why, like, oh, you see how he's lying? Right? Otherwise, they might not be able to, you know what I mean? It's almost just like a martial art or whatever, like just how to defend yourself from that kind of thing. If not everybody can fight, so I'll step in and explain why. Wait, you don't have to believe that. I can understand why you would feel the pressure to, but don't worry, it's a lie, so you're off the hook,
It's also comforting to know that you can ask, like, what would Ron Paul do in this situation?
Yeah.
And there's a clean way out. Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, it's nice that you bring a little bit of aggressiveness to this, because the anti-war movement gets branded sometimes as being soft and pacifistic and calm and reasonable. And it's nice to punch these guys in the mouth from time to time. I actually appreciate your directness with these guys. They deserve, they get a pass from everybody else in the media. It's nice that they come up against a buzzsaw like you, and then they realize that they're, that they can only sell their story on certain networks. And if the wrong person comes into a debate with them, they get exposed for who they really are.
Yep. Well, and that's like the cool part of it, right? Is just overall the message spreading, the impression being left that, like, boy, you can't really mess with the libertarians on the worst stuff, and especially because Dave Smith out there is really like leading the way in front of everyone, where his name is really just becoming a household name all over the country, where, like, because of his comedy and his in with Rogan and all of that, we're just, so many people know where he is. And I see, in the comments on Dave's videos, they say, like, oh man, I knew when this happened that Dave would address it. So I've just been waiting to hear Dave's take on the thing that happened, whatever it is, because they just know they can trust him, dude. He's got a track record going back, and they're just like, okay, dude, this guy's not going to lie, dude. What's he going to say? Whether it's about the germ or whatever, the wars, especially, dude, brand new wars breaking out. And they're like, or the Jeffrey Epstein thing or whatever it is. They're like, okay, like at the very least, they know he's honest. They know they can trust him not be deliberately wrong,
Yeah, I think part of it is his rapier wit and his unabashed, like, anti-fragility, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then over here, he's read a hella lot of Scott Horton books, and he can repeat the views that he's learned from you and your scholarship and antiwar.com and all the things he's read over the years as an informed libertarian philosophy type guy. And then bridging the ability to marshal the libertarian freedom side of the information with how to make somebody hold your ground intellectually from the comedy side. If he would have ran seriously for president, I could have voted for him.
Yeah.
That was more better than Chase Oliver or whoever the libertarians ran.
I mean, looking back on it, I'm really glad that we didn't run him, because if he'd really done his best, he could have really helped the Democrats win, and they'd have never forgiven us if we had, helped the liberal Democrats to re-ratify their evil, like, unbroken since 2008. Like, somebody had to put a halt to the dominance of the cultural left at this point. Like, it was just absolutely imperative. So if we had stood in the way of that, that would have been some pretty bad timing. And in fact, I think it was probably serendipitous that we nominated a guy with a rainbow flag, where if anybody, if he took votes from anybody, it would have been from the left. And so that was fine.
That was genius.
But yeah, we're not out of time yet. And I think, what Dave could do, if he was to ever run again or have the opportunity again, he really could make it where this is just a lot of pressure on whoever the Republican is to really get good on X, Y, and Z. And then, if need be, make way for the guy deliberately, get off the ballots and ask people to endorse the Republican after he's, like, cut his hand and done a blood oath that he's going to bring our troops home from Germany or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Something big, something worth it, to really, or you know what? I don't know, even run and lose anyway and just do your best all the way through. But just imagine if you know what I mean? Like, let's just say hypothetically, we had a bigger margin to mess with, where we knew Trump wasn't really going to lose either way. We just knew that she was going to, which, by the way, like 56 or whatever million people voted for the Democrats. So, God dang. But anyway, like, let's just say that we knew that Trump was definitely had such a margin he was going to win, or maybe in the end he'd win by just a bit, but he was sure to. Then to have Dave running to his right, to his libertarian right for that whole summer long and in the lead up to the election. He ain't good enough on ending these wars, and he ain't good enough on slashing these regulations. And you hear him talk about how he wants interest rates lower. No, dude, that's the cause of the problem in the first place, man. And all of that, and having Dave run to Trump's libertarian right for months leading up to that election, and making him essentially have to appease us rather than just throwing sops to Miriam Adelson and the War Party all day. Like, we're the voters. We're the people he's really got to throw the sops to. You know what I mean? We're the ones. And he did give, whoever wrote his speech, wrote a really good speech that he gave to the Libertarian Party He was right to stick to it because there was a lot of things about regulations he slashed last time and this kind of thing that made him absolutely preferable to the Democrats and absolutely preferable to Jeb Bush if that had been the comparison. You know what I mean? Like, he's not Ron Paul, but he's way more anti-government than any Republican we've had, even in, including Reagan.
I think it's good he paused his campaign because, Ross got out and he got a pardon, but to re-engage later with the purpose, not of winning, but to just hold these people to a higher standard.
Yeah.
And because he can do a better job than Ron Paul, because he has the philosophy and the humor. And that's a big, like, how many movies have they made about comedians been making their way into presidency, not just Ukraine?
Right.
Because he was a comedian, Zelensky.
Yeah. I have a reporter in my email box wants me to comment on, he's writing an article for the Guardian Observer about the importance of comedians in American political discourse now. And since I'm so close friends with Dave Smith, what do I think about this and that? So I got to figure out like how I want to answer those questions, but it is an important thing. And look, what's the joke? The joke is comedians got to be honest. That's the laugh, is they tell you the true thing that usually people don't talk about that, but like, that is pretty funny. You know what I mean? Like, so that's, if you're going to be really funny, you have to be honest. And so you think about every other job in politics, you just have layers and layers of reasons why to lie and why to obfuscate, why to fudge and why to be polite and why to all those things. But if you're a comedian, like, hey man, that's just not going to fly. You ain't going to be able to make your living that way, dude. You're going to have to go ahead and be brutal. That's what's funny, or at least for certain ones anyway. So you look like Tim Dillon, like, look at the comparative advantage that he brings to political commentary, right? Like, I think the first thing I ever saw of him was he's in the woods and he's wearing like some weird cloak and he's on his way to a skull and bones ceremony where they're going to go sacrifice a child or some crazy thing. And he's like, hey man, get out of my way. I'm on my way to the child sacrifice thing. And he's just whatever it was. I forget exactly. This guy is funny, dude. Yeah. And he's bringing you along with him on the premise of that joke. It ain't just the punchline, man. It's the premise that this is how it works around here or whatever. Like, goes a long way there. I don't know if you saw the one the other day where it's like, oh, we got a guest from Gaza. We're going to interview Ahmed. And then spoiler alert, if anybody didn't see this. And he goes and they cut to Ahmed and it's a severed leg in a chair. And the guy's like, oh yeah, the rest of me's been completely blown away. And like, dude, that is, you know what I mean? It's the same with punk rock or whatever, right? Like, you'll get a hell of a lot more mileage out of that than all the enough alreadys that I could ever write. You know what I mean? Like, that is what really like moves the ball. Like, do we believe in this anymore? No, apparently we don't. Apparently the new consensus is that was all a bunch of crap and we were fools to believe in that. Now we don't. And like, that's what it takes, man, and I was always, it's funny, man. Bill Hicks is such a double-edged sword in my life looking back because he was such a huge influence on me in the sense of like getting up there and being brave and getting in fights and telling the truth and all that stuff. But also he was so funny that I thought, man, I don't ever want to try to be a stand-up comedian because I could never be anywhere near as funny as that. And I don't think you have the right to try stand-up comedy unless you're really funny, not just a little. So I never did it at all. We're like, I don't know if that was really fair to always just compare myself to Bill. You know what I mean? Dang, maybe I could have tried it back then, but I just decided, no, if I'm going to do this stuff seriously, I can't really do it funnily, which was probably wrong. And I probably, and also the problem too is I'm a stoner, not a drinker. So what am I going to do? Like, just hanging around nightclubs all the time? Like, I don't really fit in there. So like, I don't know. That was kind of part of it too, but
you could do rants. Because last week we played Tim Dillon's rant about Miriam Adelson, and when people give you money, they always want a little something on, here's what you're going to shape your message. And he did this hilarious rant. Or we played a clip of Dave Smith last week where he did a big rant about BB. And when people can laugh at these people in very high power positions, it takes those people down notches and raises people up. It's a great leveling type of, so comedy, I think, is the epitome of the First Amendment in action because it is the free press. It is all these things. It is, the religion of truth. Getting
that's the regime
reality.
change. That's in the regime change playbook, man. Like, this is all the Gene Sharp, like color coded revolution stuff. Colonel Halevy, Halvey or whatever, where like, this is what you do. You get from starting with, was it Albania or Slovakia, the OK98 campaign in Slovakia. Then they went to Croatia and then Serbia and then on with the rest of color coded revolutions in Georgia and Ukraine. And a huge part of it always is they have these youth groups go out and do street theater and do satire where they always just make fun of the leader and make him some kind of punk, right? They'll have like a psychiatrist diagnosing him with paranoid schizophrenia and then chasing him around with a stick or whatever kind of thing. And just breaking that ice, getting people to laugh at the leader that they're supposed to be afraid of, that actually now we're not afraid of him anymore. And just as you said, it's a great leveler. Like actually what's special about these people that they get to be our overlords? Turns out nothing. You know what I mean? And
Our
like,
ignorance. Our ignorance of them. All right. So Gene Sharp, AKA Eugene Sharp, you can see him in a documentary, How to Start a Revolution. It's a documentary about the use of his playbook. But the U.S. intellectual playbook for creating revolutions around the world that's been repeated on dozens and dozens of coups. It was written by Gene Sharp in like 1968. He worked for the Rand Corporation. And this is in the idea of like the new Machiavellis, the idea that H.G. Wells had put out back in like the 30s, that these people were, it's part of their open conspiracy. So there's a playbook. It was generated because we have to use it on them, but we never really waited for those chickens to come home and roost. It's like it started after they did all these coups. They knew they could do it on America and just start playing us like the mighty Wurlitzer that we are.
Exactly right, dude. I mean, that's the whole thing, dude. You would think that there would be a line somewhere, but there's not a line. They go, well, here's how we do the destabilization campaign. Here's how we overthrow a president that we don't like. Here's how we, drum this up. And then, yes, you're exactly right, dude. They'll do it to us as fast as anybody else. And I'm sorry, I was I'm trying to think, wasn't it Martin Sheen who narrated the regime change video about Serbia? I was trying to find the footnote for you guys here. There's a great documentary that's like how we do it. And I have the PDF of all my footnotes here, but I did a search for Sheen and I didn't find it. That should have been it. I'm trying to remember the name of the documentary, but it was how they did the revolution in the bulldozer revolution in Serbia in '99, and then they would play this documentary. Oh, let me see if I can find. They would play this documentary every year. Or like whenever they did this regime change, they would get their favorite media to play this documentary over and over and over again.
So it's like propaganda for a regime change?
Yeah, and like teaching the youth groups that they put together how to do it. I swear I'm going to find this in my footnotes here.
Yeah, I think these are the things that escape most people's awareness, that there are organized efforts of people who aren't good, honest, hardworking, salt of the earth type people. And their entire worldview revolves around taking over your worldview instead of, letting you to, enjoy life and find your freedom. They're like, no, we're going to take your enjoyment. We're going to take your freedom because that adds to our freedom. And I don't find that plundering other people's production is ever profitable, but they have a different philosophy and we have to appreciate these types of predations.
I think that's exactly perfectly said, right? To them, freedom is power over others. Otherwise, what's the point of making a decision if you're not bossing somebody else around, By the way, I found it's Steve York is the director, Bringing Down a Dictator, from the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict, 2001. And it's on YouTube right now. And it's narrated by Martin Sheen. And it's here's how we did it in Serbia, and here's how you can do it in your country too. And they do put this on TV over and over and over again for the Orange Revolutionaries, for the Rose Revolutionaries, and the Tulip Revolutionaries, and whoever. But this is what we do.
So all the color revolutions, do those tie back to, something that happened like a century ago of like, the young Turks, the young Serbians, all those youth, they had a lot of youth movements that were being groomed in like an MI6 international network back then. And I remember hearing some like executive intelligence review presentations probably 20 years ago on this type of thing. Are you familiar with the young?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, I know that there were, there's always been undercover coup d'etats and whatever. I know that the Brits did sponsored a coup in Serbia at the outbreak of the Second World War that only just got their friends killed after the Germans were sure to invade anyway. I'm not sure about like the background of them, backing popular movements and all that in the way of the National Endowment for Democracy. I mean, the common narrative, I think, is really right, as you could say, revealed or written by David Ignatius, the CIA ombudsman in the Washington Post, where he says, the Reaganites figured out that, look, CIA covert action comes with this huge risk of being exposed and of the people that we support being exposed as recipients of CIA largesse. So what we decided to do is just spin off the National Endowment for Democracy and just do it all in public. Yes, we're passing out all this money. It's just to help democracy, though. And then, of course, they're picking winners and losers, but they're doing it in the open where they say openness is its own protection. There's nothing to expose because we're the ones who said it right away. Of course, we're pouring in all this money. Stop us. You can't. And then we do it anyway, and it works. And we just do it like that. So they were doing this really at the end of the Cold War. And I really don't know the whole history of this during the Cold War. I should go back and look at the real history of the NED during that time, but I believe that they were big backers of Polish solidarity, for example, in the 1980s in agitating against the Soviets. And of course, to a lesser degree, much lesser degree, but just like with Hungary and Czechoslovakia before, they were willing to get their friends in trouble, but they weren't willing to bail them out. America wasn't going to go to Poland in the 1980s and force the Soviets to back off. In fact, the Soviets didn't crack down, but the sock puppet government did crack down on the solidarity movement during that time after America had bolstered them up. So I'm sure that like communists would blame the CIA and the NED for the entire unraveling of the Soviet Union and the overthrow, but that's just not true, dude. I mean, it fell because for a lot of reasons, including just the absolute bankruptcy of the system itself and its inability to function with a single state ownership. I mean, it was literally full communism, not like in the accusation, but like the government owned everything. And so, as Mises says, when the salesman and the customer is the same guy, he doesn't know what the price should be. And so he doesn't know how much goods should be valued and where resources should be diverted and the rest of that. So it was just, thing was grinding to a halt. And of course, they had the horrific war in Afghanistan, which America helped to inflict on them, but they inflicted on themselves too, which was a real killer. And then this always goes unmentioned. I don't know why, but this is huge to me. Gorbachev tried to outlaw drinking. He tried to ban vodka in Russia. Well, let me tell you something, man. Like, even in the Soviet Union, popular sovereignty is a thing, at least in the sense of like what people are willing to bear. And were they willing to bear this from him? No. And look at what happened in our country. You know who got rid of prohibition? Franklin Roosevelt. And you know what it did for him? It helped him win 3 more elections after that and make himself president for life, Roosevelt, the great dictator, because he was the one who freed us from that tyranny. And, the Russian people might be willing to accept a lot, but they're not going to accept outlawing vodka. And of course, what he could have done was use his bully pulpit to say, my fellow Soviet new men, we have a real problem, and it would be great if you guys could cut down a little bit or something. You know what I mean? But he did not do that. And this is a huge error. And and anyway, and then of course, Reagan, unlike in the mythology, as they would probably tell it now, Reagan came in and said, hey, Gorby, I like you, little buddy, and put his arm right around him and said, let's be friends. And the first thing Reagan said to him, he goes, when the space aliens attack you and me, we're going to have to lie together to whoop them. And Gorbachev didn't know what to say. He's like, okay. Like, Ronald Reagan's a foot taller. He's got a cowboy hat on. He's talking mad shit. And Gorbachev was like, okay, I guess you're like the boss around here. And then it was fine. As long as we're friends, now we can end the Cold War. It's the same thing they did with Mao. They didn't work out all the details. They said, look, man, let's not fight. You be cool and I'll be cool. Shook hands on it and then worked out the details second. And so, that was what Reagan did essentially with Gorbachev. And then as the more Gorbachev warmed up and tried to reform the system, the more people realized that this isn't going to work. And in fact, in some ways, it made it worse. So like, for example, they tried to decentralize control over the factories. But all that did was mean that the managers now had total control of the factories. They still didn't own them. So they just sold everything, took all the money, and split, and like this kind of, so like it just helped bring down the system even more when they were trying to reform it. And so if they want to, if like modern leftists want to say that was all a covert activity by the CIA that made all that happen, no, in fact, my very best understanding, I've read a lot about this, or at least a lot of different things that mention this, that the CIA had no idea what was going on in the Soviet Union because they were so busy lying about them. And Robert Gates was the director at that time, and he was in the middle of explaining how the Soviet Union is 12 feet tall and they're not going anywhere. And Paul Samuelson, the famous economist, said that they are outproducing us and in every way and all of these things. And the CIA, they were so busy lying that they were caught unaware when the wall came down, and they were caught unaware when the whole USSR came unraveled in 1991. They didn't know that there was going to be a commie coup, and they didn't know that the Russians were then going to overthrow the Soviet Union and get rid of the damn thing after the failed commie coup. They didn't know none of that. So, because they were so busy lying, much less being behind it. You know what I mean? But then in the color-coded revolutions, it is this Cold War apparatus that they built of the National Endowment for Democracy, where, as I show in Provoke, that they started in Albania in 97, Slovakia in 98, Serbia in and Croatia in 98, and then Serbia in 99, Georgia in 2003, Ukraine in 2004, Kyrgyzstan in 2005. They tried to do Belarus also in 2005, but that failed. And of course, the whole point was, and people were really distracted by Iraq at that time, but the point was they're trying to move all these countries away from Russia. And it was funny. A guy emailed me and was like, oh yeah, I'm so sure that America overthrew the government in Kyrgyzstan in 2005. Why? I have an article from 2003 about how the guy's doing exactly as he's told. And I was like, oh yeah? How many years difference is there between 2005 and 2003, pal? Because what happened in the intervening years was he invited the Russians to also open up a base in Kyrgyzstan about 30 miles over the horizon there. And they decided, or away just over the horizon, and they decided that they did not want that. And he was trying to limit their ability to fly AWACS planes out of there, which obviously are a threat to the Russians in terms of like monitoring all their airspace inside Russia. And so then they turned on him and overthrew him.
Yeah, so the National Endowment for Democracy does these things in the open, like an open conspiracy. That's the U.S. foray into these type of color revolutions, if you will. But the longer history, when I wanted to close the loop on Gene Sharp and the young Americans, the young Romanians, the young Polish, the young Turks, because it was a fusion between Mazzini's European Freemasonry and the B'nai B'rith, which was young Israel back in the day. And this was like the 1860s, 1870s that this is all flourishing in Europe. Because I think, wasn't there a big revolution time in Europe, 1848, where there was a lot of Europeans that came to America? The Pilgrims of 48 is a famous book about people from Europe coming here. So these changes that went on over there that are outside of our like history timeline of what's happened, I think do have influence up to this day, because all the proto-Zionism, and we'll talk about Israel real quick in a minute, but all the proto-Zionist writings from like the 1840s, 1860s, they're talking about taking over the Freemasonic lodges in Europe to create a fusion of all the historical cults into one, using international banking families to do this kind of takeover from outside the government, because it's mostly the members of those secret societies are people on high places of various European governments. So when you have that also in the timeline and have that evidence, how do you see the story of the state of Israel being born out of nowhere in 1948, when there's a lot more outside of America history to be told on that subject?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Zionist movement really started in the late 19th century, right? And they had limited success in getting European Jews to move to Palestine at that time. Some of them had gone, some of them had come home. And then, it was after 45 was, the argument was that, well, now after the Holocaust, they have to have somewhere to go. And so that gave the European powers the impetus to help move them out and send them to Palestine and all that. So, I think that much is the official history of the thing, and it was, as Daryl Cooper in Fear and Loathing has done a real good job, where it's a 25-hour podcast and it ends in 48. The whole thing is on the lead up to the thing. And so, yeah, he points out that you have a bunch of mostly desperately poor Eastern European immigrants, but who are very connected to some very wealthy people in England and others who are helping to contribute to the project for their own reasons and so forth. In fact, I can't remember the name of the guy now, but I had read a thing about, I don't know if it was Balfour or not. I don't think it was Balfour, but it was one of these guys who was like in the English government during the First World War, who was like truly anti-Semitic. It was saying the number one best reason to support a homeland for the Jews in Palestine was so that they could kick them out of England, send them there instead. And so, sort of like the alliance with the evangelical Christians today, who ultimately plan on watching Jesus come back and send all but 600 converts to hell forever once he returns. It's like, okay, there's some pretty friendly allies that you guys are in bed with here, but I guess whatever gets it done. In fact, Irving Kristol was asked about, man, are you sure you want to buy a jumbo jet for Jerry Falwell to go around spreading this message around that ultimately like has us all die in the apocalypse? And he goes, well, it's their theology. It's our Israel. So they can believe whatever they want and we'll get what we want out of it. And so, that was one of those deals. They made a deal with the Nazis too. You hate us so much, want rid of us? Help give our people a ride out of here. We'll take it. Send us to Palestine. And, and I actually never read Black's book about that, the transfer agreement.
The Havara agreement from, it starts in 1933 and it goes on for several years. And then there's Tony Greenstein has a book about Zionism and Nazism. The founding fathers of Zionism looked down on Orthodox Jews because they knew that they would be poor farmers in this desert land they're trying to colonize. So they had a group of people that were kibbutz worthy, and they had a group of people that they couldn't take with them. And so they were talking about like how do we get the guys to Palestine and what can we do for exchange? And that went on for some time. Edwin Black is a prolific author. I have all his books. I mean, his family disowned him after he wrote the transfer agreement book. But it's based in factual reality. And so there's, we stand on the shoulders of giants. It's because you and I are literate. Yeah. We have good recall of these facts, and we can help introduce them to a wider audience. But I want to note for the audience that Irving Kristol is the father of William Kristol, who Scott debated. And, he's like one of the founding fathers of neoconism. Right, because it comes from the Likud and all the way. There's a whole historical lineage behind what became neoconservatism in America. But Irving Kristol is a big part of that. So so the first generation were all Trotskyites. So you had Irving Kristol, Norman Podhoretz, Max Schachman, Albert Wohlstetter, and Leo Strauss, and of course, James Burnham and Sidney Hook and all of those guys. So you had really the founders of post-war conservatism were mostly neoconservatives, right? Because the people who were and this is, Justin Raimondo writes about this in Reclaiming the American Right, and Rothbard writes about it in Betrayal of the American Right, that like essentially the old right-wingers were dying. They were old and retired, and they had mostly shut the hell up after Pearl Harbor. And they're like, okay, well, now we're in the war. And so like all their opposition was for naught by then. And then by the end of the war, like, Mencken, I don't know when Mencken died, but Garrett Garrett and Albert J. Nock and all these guys were either dead or dying and retired by then. And so you had William F. Buckley come in and, with the National Review. And he had, Russell Kirk and Richard Weaver were, two of the most important kind of founders of post-war conservatism. And I don't think either of them had ever been leftists. But if you look at like the original staffing of the National Review, it was like a bunch of ex-communists, at least like 4 or 5 of them. Now, Whittaker Chambers, I think, had been a Stalinist rather than a Trotskyite. Not that that's an improvement, but and see, the deal with the Trots is that they were against Stalin because Stalin killed Trotsky, and they were mad that he was doing it his way instead of their way, which was world revolution and all that stuff. But they also, I think, thought of like, Stalin as a monster, and where Trotsky would have done such a better job if it had been him was their belief, right? And then plus they're Americans. So of course they side with America in the Cold War because why the hell not? This is not their kind of communism and they're from here. So when William F. Buckley and the guys needed a bunch of hawks to staff the magazine to be the Cold Warriors, he went to the neocons.
because the old guys were either anti-war still, even though it was a commie enemy in the Cold War. They were still either non-interventionists, or they were just too old and retired and gone anyway. And so he brought in this whole new generation of guys. And then you had, of course, with Podhoretz and Crystal, you have a Commentary magazine and the whole group surrounding that as well. The Weekly Standard comes much later, I think in the late 80s or early 90s. But you had, of course, the senator from Boeing was a guy named Scoop Jackson from Washington State. And a bunch of the neocons who had studied under Wohlstetter and Strauss at the University of Chicago then went and worked for him. And he was sort of like a Cold War Democrat, like a Harry Truman type Democrat. So he was sort of the halfway house between the original generation of ex-Trots and then, their students, basically, who went on to go work for Scoop Jackson. And a lot of them were funneled into the government then. There's also an important Trotskyite named Max Schachman, who was the founder of the Social Democrats USA. And then, like we were talking about with Gene Kirkpatrick, the Young People's Socialist League was the adjunct of that. And then so you had Joshua Moravchik and Elliot Abrams and other neoconservatives like them came through Max Schachman's group. And Schachman had been Trotsky's #1 guy in America before then, moving a little bit right, I guess, or his people did. And so, so in other words, unfortunately, the neoconservatives have really been dominant mostly on the American right since the Second World War, certainly when it comes to foreign policy. And so, and then famously, although maybe unknown to younger people, this is the movement that lied us into war in 2003. They had supported Iraq War I, but that wasn't really their whole brainchild or what have you. Whereas Iraq War II was absolutely the project of David Wurmser, Richard Pearl, Paul Wolfowitz, and these, quite frankly, Israeli agents in the United States. They're the vanguard of the Israel lobby, essentially, working to keep America an empire, to keep it available for Israel, and to get us to fight as many wars for Israel as they can.
All right, so this is where we're tying the bow on the package. Whitaker Chambers was like a go-between in the communist networks that handled Alger Hiss, Donald Hiss, a whole bunch of other people. And this is brought out by the Venona transcripts after the 90s. They were able to decrypt it. But also what I'm noticing is neocons, a lot of Trotskyites in the neoconservative movement, but also the neocons show up after World War II. And the neocons also bring in a political foreign policy agenda that is always in Israel's favor. There might be an intermingling of those three things. There might be a bigger geopolitical strategic infiltration of our government to change the attitudes, values, behaviors, and beliefs of Americans to be in line to invade Iraq in 2003. And what I would point to is two things, two articles of evidence. November 1998, Foreign Affairs. There's articles in there by Bernard Lewis about Osama bin Laden, but it's Ashton Carter, Philip, what's the guy? Philip Zelikow and John Deutsch. That before they did the Rebuilding America's Defenses paper for the neoconservative think tank, they published it's the second issue, so it's November issue of Foreign Affairs, and in there's a specific article that calls for a new Pearl Harbor. All the things that they did in the longer Rebuilding America's Defenses paper are in that Council on Foreign Relations article. And so you have a guy, John Deutsch, CIA, accused of narco-terrorism, drug money laundering, these sort of things. Ashton Carter, future Secretary of Defense after 9/11, and Philip Zelikow, future Executive Director of the 9/11 Commission, to tell us the official story when his background was on how to create public myths. So it's an interesting mosaic.
He was, I don't know his entire background in detail. I'd have to go back, but I believe he was known as Brent Scowcroft, Council on Foreign Relations, Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice type, along with Robert Blackwell and others. And Zelikow famously, or not famously enough, but famously to me, blamed the neoconservatives for Iraq War II and said it was because of their loyalty to Israel. And that when Saddam Hussein would pay the families of any Palestinian who died in conflict with Israel, emphasis on any. And so that meant if a little old lady got bulldozed in her house and killed, he would pay her family. But also it meant if someone went and did a suicide attack, then he would pay their family too. So this is, I think it's fair to say, and absolutely from the point of view of the war party, This is Saddam Hussein paying a bounty to suicide bombers, to Hamas suicide bombers. And so Philip Zelikow brought that up and said, listen, this is why Paul Wolfowitz wanted to do the war, okay? Now, that wasn't a big sell to the American people, so they didn't talk about that a lot. But privately, they sure as hell did explain that this is why they really wanted to do the war. And Zelikow, threw the Zionists under the bus for that.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of Americans thought we went to take the oil, but we didn't take the oil. So it does seem that we were just preventing other countries from having Saddam send payments to families.
That was a big part of it. And of course, the clean break doctrine was based on the lies of Ahmed Chalabi, the Iraqi exile who was sponsored by Iran and whose job it was to tell these idiot neocon Israeli spies in Washington what they needed to hear to launch this war. So that included that the new supermajority Shiite Iraq would be cozy with Israel and would break ties between Iran and Hezbollah so that Israel could finish stealing Palestine in peace and would build a new oil pipeline even to Haifa. And they bought this, and Netanyahu himself bought it. I mean, there was a statement that he gave. I'm almost certain this is in the Jerusalem Post, that he gave a statement that he gave, or even a talk that he gave in London in 97 or 98, where he reaffirmed that he believed in this crap. And this is what Wormser and Pearl absolutely did. And if you read A Clean Break, and the companion article is called Coping with Crumbling States, and then they wrote a book called Tyranny's Ally, America's Failure to Remove Saddam Hussein, which is by Wormser with a foreword by Pearl. And in all three of those things, they mentioned Chalabi over and over again. Ahmed Chalabi assures us that this is going to work great. And then they're such idiots, dude. And the stuff that they're talking about is like, yeah, he assures us this river is going to start running uphill. Like, it's just nonsense what he's making them believe, and that they are so willing to believe as long as it's for Israel. And of course, all they did was put Iran's best friends in power in Baghdad. They didn't put Israel's best friends in power, and they never got their oil pipeline to Haifa. But that was what the war was for. It wasn't for oil. It was for oil for Israel.
And wanted to close the loop. Ashton Carter not only was future Secretary of Defense, but he's a Rhodes Scholar who co-authored Catastrophic Terrorism, tackling the new danger by John Deutsch, Philip Zelikow, 1998, Foreign Affairs. And it should still be on Foreign Affairs. Let's see if they censor it or if it's going to serve it to us. Survey says, oh, it's still there. Look at that.
Yeah, they have a pretty good archive.
And then if I hit Control F and I type in Pearl, wait, they got they wanted to advertise to me. Do we have Pearl? No.
Catastrophic terrorism. Here we go. Interesting.
World Trade. They won't show the whole article. That's why. But they talk about the World Trade Center, Pearl Harbor. It's like the whole Rebuilding America's Defenses document that they did the year later. This is like the whole plan for that. So unless I have my timeline backwards, I'm pretty sure the CFR article is first.
Well, all you have to do is put it in
archive.org,
archive.ph or .is, and you'll jump right over that.
That's what we the nerds do all the time.
Yeah, you can get even a little plugin for your Mozilla where you just hit the button in the corner and it does it automatically. So,
all right. So, as far as Zionism today is going, everything's blamed on 10/7. There's an escalation of noticing that's going on around the world where people are saying, what is going on? Why are they leveling?
You know what? If we could go back one section here.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I think, quite frankly, like if you just take the writing here at face value, I mean, essentially what they're saying, I think is just smart. That like, man, look at what happened in East Africa. Look at the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. They go, well, what if that had been a nuke? They could have settled for, what if that had actually worked? And one tower had toppled over into the other, and then they had fell onto 3 or 4 more after that and whatever. You'd be talking about 75,000 dead people all at once kind of thing. Like, this is talking about ground zero, man.
Catastrophic terrorism.
So they're saying here, and then they say, the way that they frame it was that, like Pearl Harbor, this event would divide our past and future into a before and after. I just think that's wise. I don't think that they're like in on anything. I think they're saying, and this is the same thing that was going on. The Council on Foreign Relations held under Gary Hart, the Hart-Rudman Commission was essentially the original 9/11 Commission, I know you remember, but the 9/11 Commission was not really about investigating 9/11. The 9/11 Commission, as W. Bush said, this is an outcome-based investigation. And the outcome was to be recommending the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. That's what it was for. But Hart Rudman had already done that as part of a CFR panel in the late 1990s. And this, I don't think, was anything about like, oh, ha, 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 we know what's coming. It was like, oh, crap, we know what's coming, right? Like Bill Clinton has been backing these terrorists and pissing them off a lot. And we're kind of wide open here. You know what I mean? Like, and for those of us who really cared about this stuff a lot in the 1990s, it was obvious. But like, our military bases are wide open. I mean, they made a X-Files spin-off TV show. The pilot episode of The Lone Gunman was they hit the World Trade Center. And we knew because in 1995, the guy that had cooked the bomb for the first World Trade Center had been caught in, or not him, but his buddies had been caught in the Philippines. He escaped to Pakistan. But his buddies had been caught, and they had what was called the Bojinka plot was on his computer. And on that computer was a plan to kill Bill Clinton and the Pope, and a plan to time bomb 12 planes with Casio watch time bombs over the Pacific. And another plan was to hijack 10 planes and crash them into targets in the United States. And so they knew that all of that was a risk. That didn't mean that they knew exactly what all these guys were doing. I don't think. Like, I think I've actually wanted for a long time maybe to just have a private like argument with you all day about 9/11 someday.
We don't have to argue. We could just share notes, bro.
Yeah. No, I mean,
but to your point,
in a nice way. I didn't mean like
Bojangles comes from the Able Danger 10 terabytes that they deleted. So there's a whole bunch of that. And the insider trading is really interesting. Yeah. There's a whole, like, Britain warning us 25 times before 9/11 that Osama bin Laden's going to strike us is also reminiscent of MI6 running Operation Double Cross during Pearl Harbor, where they were running the operatives known as Tricycle, and I forget the other one, but I have the notes. And they were running the German operatives that were working with the Japanese, setting up the Pearl Harbor attack. And they brought
that. I don't know about that.
Oh yeah, it's there's a book in 1972 by, let's see, the introduction's by Norman Pearson. The author is John Cecil Masterman. He was the director of MI6 during World War II. So Norman Pearson is the Anglo-American establishment guy at Yale who works with like Nabokov's cousin, because there's Victor Nabokov. There's a couple different Nabokovs in the picture. But Anglo-American intelligence is the double cross system. So we called it X2 in America. They called it XX, which is the 20 committee in Roman numerals, but it's also euphemistically called the double cross system. In 1971, John Cecil Masterman, former MI6 chief, writes his memoirs, and it's called the double cross system. And in there, he says that they knew in August of 1941 that Pearl Harbor was an attack. It was a target for attack. And they had the specific questionnaires that they were gathering information on what to hit in what order in the attack. And what they did is they showed it to J. Edgar Hoover, but they showed it to him in a way that he couldn't see that it was credible. So he ignored it. So therefore, they've informed us. They've done their due diligence. And what Masterman says is, they were in a new relationship. The special relationship was still new. We used to be enemies, and they were hesitant to share that much intelligence with the Americans who were new at it, right? So those little bits and pieces tie into Operation Gladio later, and this bigger international, supranational establishment of, the deep state's not just the national security people and the office people, but it's those defense contractors and think tanks that are superfluous to government regulation. Yeah. Like Area 51 is not run by United States government. It's run by a bunch of, contractors. They're like filing cabinets holding things for people in the future that we don't know yet. It's a really interesting situation they have going on there. But I agree. More study into all these things is what's needed. So
well, look, I already knew, but I found out a lot more about American support for the bin Ladenites in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Chechnya. And, I had in my previous book, I just kind of mentioned that pretty quickly that, Bill Clinton, the whole time these guys were attacking us, he was still backing them anyway. And,
but he was a Rhodes Scholar. See, I see Clinton's actions there not being as part of the American plan, but by being part of a larger global plan that he's been read into at Oxford. Well, it's like, yeah.
I mean, yeah, he's a Rhodes Scholar. I don't know how much, like, how meaningful all that Milner's kindergarten stuff is by the 1990s, where like Clinton's loyalty being divided in that sense. But the plan, the English are our special partners, right? From their point of view, there's no conflict of interest here. We work with them together on, we want to get rid of the Serbs. We want to get rid, well, in fact, we work with the Germans on our partnership of making sure to keep the Germans down and keeping it's Britain's interest to keep the United States dominant in Europe so that Germany's not. And
we're like the property managers now.
Yeah. But the Americans agree with that too. You know what I mean? We don't need the British to tell us that, but like there are partners in that, and there are partners in the project of dominating the Middle East and the rest. So I don't know that you need like a modern Lord Milner to like tell everybody what to do when like that's the agenda already going forward. And you can see where CIA and MI6 work with the Saudis. As long as they're killing Serbs and Russians and now Shiites, then it's all good. And then I think, I don't know, man. I'm not trying to like, sell anyone short on how evil they might be. But I do know that like when I take the best looks that I have, and I've read a hell of a lot about this stuff. But when I look at the assassination of Rabbi Kahane, the First World Trade Center bombing, all the Al-Qaeda attacks in Saudi Arabia and in Africa and the USS Cole and all that, I don't see a CIA or a MI6 hand behind those things. This is typical jihadi antics. They're trying to start a war with the United States. Bin Laden said repeatedly he wanted a war of attrition against us to replicate what he was doing against the Soviet Union. Just because Bill Clinton likes him doesn't mean that he likes Bill Clinton back. And their major grievances against the United States had not changed. And I think if you look at like a guy like John Kiriakou, who goes, man, let me tell you something. Cofer Black said to me, oh my God, John, they're going to hit us, man. They're going to hit us. And I can't get anybody to listen to me and pay attention. This is the head of CIA counterterrorism. They're going to hit us, man. They're going to hit us. He's legit afraid. John Kiriakou did not sense deception here. Like this guy is sowing plausible deniability.
I agree.
For his prior knowledge of this attack. He's terrified that something is going to happen. And of course, W. Bush is being told by the neoconservatives, man, we can't go to Afghanistan now or we're never going to get to Baghdad. Don't listen to the CIA. Keep your eye on the ball. So that doesn't mean necessarily that they were in on it. It just meant that they had an agenda that precluded paying attention to something that's going to take them away from what they were trying to do at that time. And I know enough about, like, for example, and look, if this is just a limited hangout, fine. But like, I'm sure you've seen the clip of Michael Scheuer, the former chief of the CIA.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Unit,
I've been in movies with him.
Yeah. And I've spoken with him numerous times, whatever. But there's a famous clip of him testifying before the Congress saying the only good thing that happened to America on 11 September is that building came down on John O'Neill's head. Well, so he's saying, dude, he's celebrating that the World Trade Center collapsed and killed the head of the FBI's counterterrorism division in New York. Why? They hated each other. Now, that could be an easy like spin, but it also seems to be absolutely the case that the CIA, even though parts of the agency certainly, and I don't know exactly how it broke down, but parts of the agency were working with the Saudis to back these guys in Chechnya and wherever, in Kosovo too at that time, where parts of them were really afraid of what was going on here. And the FBI would take everything they knew and lock it up behind a grand jury, where the CIA could never get to it again, instead of sharing it with them at least first before locking it up behind a grand jury. And the CIA remember the rendition program began under Clinton, not Bush. They were kidnapping Al-Qaeda guys and sending them home to be taken out and shot before W. Bush ever came to power. So yes, they're backing them in some places, but they're kidnapping them and murdering them in other places. And they seem to be really worried. And meanwhile, the NSA won't share anything. We know this from the Shadow Factory. The NSA won't give anything to the FBI or CIA. And so,
right, because they work with GCHQ. They're a child of GCHQ, which is Government Communications Headquarters of the UK. So
I mean, maybe, but George Tenet was their boss. Right. And as Scheuer put it to me, George Tenet didn't have the moral courage to just march down there and say, give me the damn intercepts. And they were just husbanding it for their own, parochial needs. But there's one more thing here. There's a story from Ali Soufan, who was the deputy head of counterterrorism in New York. I subscribe to his email list. He writes pretty bright stuff. Not perfect, but pretty bright stuff regularly. But anyways, he told a story one time to Alex Gibney that did the Taxi to the Dark Side. and he's with Doug Rossini, who is one of the FBI agents who swears that the CIA would not let him tell the FBI what they knew. And the CIA says, BS, we did too tell them. They just don't check their email over there. That's what they're fighting about. But anyway, so it's Doug Rossini and I forgot the other guy and Ali Soufan talking. And Ali Soufan says he was in Yemen working the cold case on September 11th. And they brought him into the embassy, i.e. CIA headquarters, and took him to the back. And they opened up a manila envelope that had like this graphical representation of the Malaysia meeting. And there was all the guys that did the cold plot and the key guys that did 9/11. And Ali Soufan took one look at it and said, why didn't you guys give me this, man? He'd been working and working and working the cold case. Both of these plots were hatched at that Malaysia meeting.
Sure.
And if the CIA, and I just believe the guy when he's going.
No, I can believe him too, but I think a lot
same
of these
thing
guys...
with Colleen Rowley in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
Like they're strong. We know why the FBI did not let her seek a FISA warrant. It's because we like the terrorists in Chechnya. It's not because we want there to be a successful attack and we don't want you getting in the way. It was because the terrorists in Chechnya aren't terrorists. They're freedom fighters and we like them. And if we tell you that they're tied to these guys tied to those groups is enough to get a FISA warrant on them, then we're admitting that we're backing terrorists and we can't do that.
Isn't that the Kirkpatrick doctrine?
Yes, but I'm just saying it leads to September 11th attacks rather than that being the object of it. You know what I mean?
I agree. There is a treasure trove of evidence that points toward blowback. But there's also other aspects of the history. Like I could show that the Saudis and the Bin Laden network have been groomed by British intelligence since like the early 1920s. So,
well, at least since World War II. I mean, yeah,
right,
I don't think there's any question about that.
Well, I mean, it goes back to St. John Philby, who was Kim Philby's dad, who groomed Ibn Saud and took him under his wing so that they could become a kingdom in the first place for Standard Oil and their other oil interests. The Saudis wanted
They built
water.
the Muslim Brotherhood too.
Yes, in 1928. Yeah,
in the Cold War. Well, and in the Cold War, they especially backed them because they were the religious conservative counter to the nationalists and the communists or socialists of whatever stripe in the Middle East at that time.
And then the other part was the 1993 bombing. Have you ever heard the tape of FBI agent John Antisev as taped by Imad Salem?
I have the audio.
Okay, so that 24 minutes, how does that fit into the official story of 1993 in your opinion?
Well, I mean, I think it's 100% clear what's going on there. I have had people in the past try to tell me that, oh, when he says he means this, not that, and things like that. But I think if you just look at it like on the face of it, it's clear what's going on here. Is what the story is that this guy was an Egyptian army intelligence officer who's living in the United States, who was recruited by these guys to do the plot, to do the attack. And he had volunteered to build a bomb in order to preclude anyone else from being the bomb maker, said, I'll take care of the bomb. Then he went to the FBI and said, hey guys, I've just been recruited into a terrorist plot. You should hire me as an informant and then we'll make a fake bomb with an inert ingredient and then we'll have a great bust. Or at least maybe that part of it was their idea. But he was perfectly cooperative. So it's John Antisev and Nancy Floyd are the agents working the case. But then their boss is a guy named Carson Dunbar. And Dunbar wants to force Imad Salem to wear a wire, and which he cannot do. He's like, dude, I'm sleeping in my pajamas on the floor of the mosque with these guys. I'm not wearing a wire. Where am I going to put it? And forget it. And then he wanted to cut his pay from $500 to $300 a week. And Antisev and Floyd were trying to keep the guy on board. And he said, I can't. And he bailed. And he told the rest of the crew, I think the FBI's on to me. And he bailed out. And then they brought in Ramzi Youssef. Now the FBI just no longer has an informant inside the plot. They've essentially lost control and oversight of the entire operation. This guy comes in, he knows how to build a real bomb and does so. And then we're only just lucky that they parked it here instead of there. People say like, if it had just been another few feet over near this column instead of that one. But I saw some engineers say, really what they would have needed to do was take out this one wall that was right there. They just parked next to that wall. It would have brought in, I forget, the Hudson or the East River or whatever it is. I'm from Texas, but it would have brought the river in because the bottom of the World Trade Center is in what they called the bathtub, this big concrete thing that was below sea level there. And if they had just hit that wall, it would have absolutely, like they were just sure. it would have caused one tower to fall over into the other and kill them all. And it was essentially, the best I could tell was that, and I guess I did skip a step at the beginning, was that the CIA did intervene with the State Department and INS to allow these guys into the country in the first place, because at least the reporting at the time was that, and this was actually the State Department ratting on them, I think, to the Boston Globe and the New York Times, was saying that, well, they told us we like these guys. They're friends of ours from the war in Afghanistan. So, and it was essentially Egyptian Islamic Jihad, which ended up merging with the Azam group to become Al-Qaeda. So this was like the first proto-Al-Qaeda attacks. And of course, before the first World Trade Center, they assassinated Rabbi Kahane in New York City, who was the radical right-wing rabbi whose party had been outlawed by the Israeli government for being quote unquote fascist. The Supreme Court had banned them.
Was that the same group that went back and assassinated Rabin in 96?
I'm not certain. It was 95, but I'm not certain if the guy was actually a member of that group or not. I know that he was a stated fan of Netanyahu, who did that attack. And obviously the Koch party ideology, which was expel all the Arabs, is now like centrism in Israel, which was considered, illegal right-wing fascism back in the 1970s when the Supreme Court, kicked him out. I think it was in the 70s when the Supreme Court banned his party from even running. But now, the guy Baruch Goldstein, who was a member of his party and did the assassination at the mosque, or the massacre at a mosque in 1994, the current national interior minister has a portrait of that guy on the wall, of Goldstein on the wall. As Daryl Cooper said, imagine if you had a guy who had a picture who was from the white power party, when Ben Gvir is from the Jewish Power Party. Imagine you had a guy from the White Power Party who has a portrait of Dylan Roof, the guy who massacred all the little old black ladies at the church in South Carolina, right? And had him hanging on the wall, and then became the head of the National Police, became the Attorney General, or the head of the FBI. I mean, that is the situation in Israel right now. Is absolutely unbelievable. That is how far to the right that they have gone there. At this point. So yeah. And look, I'm sorry, man. I always get caught up in the 9/11 stuff and it sucks because I don't want to be like the anti-truther guy. Like, that's not my job, is like chastising other alternative media people for stuff. Like, my job is making the case for blowback the best way I understand it on all these things, and leave the rest. I can make the case for
blowback too.
So yeah, so I'm not really trying to like, be the guy who just debunks all those things. But at the same time, I admit that like, I've spent the last 24 years being quite annoyed at all the absolute bullshit on the truther side, when they could have focused specifically on the things that are truly damning and that we do know about, such as you indicated, the role of Saudi intelligence in running these guys. Like, that's the purloined letter, right? They censored 28 pages right out of the congressional investigation. There it is. That's the Sherlock Holmes story. They're looking everywhere for the purloined letter. It's right there on the table. It's a little wadded up, so nobody notices. It just looks like an old piece of junk mail, but it's actually, there it is right in front of you. And then the same thing, of course, with what did Mossad know and when did they know it? And then for that matter, forget like all intention, which is so hard to prove and understand anyway, but like, just look at all the people at FBI, CIA, and NSA who did not stop it. And like, let's punish them. Like, let's take Prince Bandar and Prince Turkey and just string them up and like maybe start poking them with a spear in the side or something and see what they got to say. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what's wrong with that. Whereas there's so many red herrings where like, I just don't like red herrings, man. I'm trying to like get to what's really right. You know what I mean? There's so much garbage where, Donald Rumsfeld shot a missile at the Pentagon while he was sitting in the son of a bitch. Meanwhile, the guys who actually crashed that plane, they're the San Diego cell. That's the key to the whole damn thing. Those are the guys who were closest to Saudi intelligence the whole time. But nobody's looking at that because they're all chasing their tail over this BS. And that's the part that pisses me off. We could have, what do we know about the San Diego cell? They were the guys that were followed from Malaysia to Bangkok to LAX, man.
I agree that all exists.
The whole damn thing.
Yes, there's a whole paper trail and an evidence trail of these guys being groomed to do the thing that they did. But then there's the flight data recorders and there's the airline pilots who are like, you can't get an airline to do those things.
Nah, that's beyond bullshit.
That's bullshit. Terminal velocity, for instance,
I had pilots in my cab like within days. American Airlines pilots telling me anybody could do that.
Terminal air velocity of that plane at that altitude is not what the official story tells you. So I'm just saying there's inaccuracies that need to be fleshed out.
No way, dude. I'm telling you, man. I talked to American Airlines pilots, multiple American Airlines pilots in my cab at that time over and over again. And they told me, dude, this is what the American Airlines pilot told me, okay? He goes, these planes are made by monkeys for other monkeys to drive, okay? They're not much harder to drive than your car. If you've been trained on one, you pick up a target on the ground and you steer at it. It's doable. These guys had some training. That's all they needed. The secret to 9/11, the American Airlines pilots told me and all agreed, 4 of them riding in my cab. And that was just one because I asked the others after that too. The secret 9/11 is you and your 5 idiot friends could do it too. Anybody could. And at that time, at least, kick that cockpit door in, pick a target on the ground and crash right into it. A little bit of training is enough to do you.
I agree that that seems believable on its surface. Let me ask you about this.
And it did to them too. They did not say, "Oh my God, that doesn't sound right." They were like, "Yeah, of course,
of course, yes." It's well thought out. I agree. The book called The Witness Tree. Are you familiar with it? Because it recounts a blackmail situation that happened to Nelson Rockefeller. And the thing is,
that's not surprising.
The blackmail situation had to do with his funding of the Nazis. In exchange for that blackmail being hidden, he would trade his Latin American votes for Israel to be recognized by a state. Now, the source for that story is a guy called Reuven Shalom, I believe. Shaloah, Shiloah. He's the founder of Mossad. So when a journalist and researcher who works for the Department of Justice, John Loftus, with a cosmic NATO clearance, gets a call from the guy who blackmailed Nelson Rockefeller, tells the story, it's tough to report on that. So what Loftus did was he found a Canadian fiction writer called Brendan Howley, and they wrote a book together called The Witness Tree, which I think you would find interesting just from the Dulles brothers killing off Eleanor's boyfriend because he was a Zionist angle. In this book, it's all based on like national security evidence. The story is told about the Dulles brothers, but then it gets to the part where the 2 guys from Haganah go up to blackmail Nelson Rockefeller. It's very detailed. And I wasn't familiar I didn't know if you were familiar with that, or if I could point you in a direction where you could look at that, at least that chapter.
Yeah, that sounds fun. I'm a big Nelson Rockefeller hater from way back. So
I have president, when he ran for vice president, I have one of his posters around here. I like draw a little mustache and devil horns on him sometimes.
I had a rant one time. I was like 20 or whatever. And I was like ranting about like who invented the no knock entry? Nelson Rockefeller. And who wrote the UN charter? Nelson Rockefeller. And whatever. And some guy made a hip hop song out of it. But I only got to hear it once and I never heard it again. But somewhere out there, there's
Attica happened.
Yeah, and Attica's in there. Who sent the National Guard to Attica? And like I forgot. There was 4 or 5 things. And he made a song out of it. So that exists somewhere, maybe.
I'm sure you're sampled in many songs, and people should send them to you so you can hear.
Yeah, they should
have a copy, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Last question: have you ever seen it's not a mockumentary. It's a early 2000s film called "Who Killed John O'Neill," and it's part art because it was done by film students at Boston University or University of Boston. So it was Ty Rober and Ryan Thurston. One is the filmmaker. He made it with a 1940s Bolex wind-up camera, and the other is an actor who plays 6 different characters in the film. What they do is they break down the deep state, CIA, MI6, all the terrorist networks, the corporate networks, Kroll, AIG, Martian McLennan, all these types of things. And it's more to like, it's fiction to expose the truth, if you will. So I'm going to find a copy of that someplace and get it to you just so you could separate the art and look at the research, because they have some very interesting research that I don't think there's too many people other than yourself on our side who could kind of cognize and recognize what's going on.
Man, yeah. Send me your whole list of books you think I need to read.
Oh, for sure.
I'm
I do that. I send books to Kurt Metzger for the past couple of years. He calls me his rabbi when he's on Rogan.
That's fine. So look, I used to read a lot of this kind of stuff before the terror war years. Yeah. I read Carol Quigley in 1997, I guess, or whatever, after I read Jekyll Island. I read Jekyll Island like 95, 96. So, I spent a lot of the pre-W. Bush years catching up on all that Bircher stuff that you're talking about, you know. But I haven't done a whole lot of that kind of reading really since then, because there's been so much going on in the modern era too. So
For sure. Plus, you're a producer now. You're not just a consumer. You know?
Well, yeah. I mean, although this is what I always produced was, look, I read a thing and now I want to interview the guy about it. Like, that's really what I do. So it's not that, but it's just a matter of like, you know, if I'm going to be, you know, reading and interviewing a guy this week, like, am I going to go back and do a Vietnam show, or am I going to go back and do a World War I show, or I'm really just going to stick to what's going on right now? And most of the time, my time is too limited, and I end up doing the immediate rather than going back. But like, I do have plans to one day, and I've read a bunch of them, but like not at all at one time or whatever. But I really want to go back and read all of my Vietnam War books and then interview all my best guys about all of the things about it, and just whatever. I'd like to do a month on Vietnam. You know what I mean? But like, what month am I going to do that? I don't know. Like, how can I ever actually make that work? You know what I mean? Or even going back and rereading Quigley, of all things. Like, dude, it's been like almost 30 years since I read more than just like going back as a reference, and actually read cover to cover through the Anglo-American establishment. And I guess, I don't know if I ever finished all the way through Tragedy and Hope, but I sure read major sections of it.
Have you ever checked out Tragedy and Hope 101 by Joe Plummer? What he did was he took the big book and Anglo-American establishment, and he amalgamated into a story that's readily comprehensible.
Well, that's what Skousen did.
Yeah.
That's what Skousen did.
This is done without an agenda,
The Naked
though.
Capitalist.
Yeah, it's like more of a just, yeah, because I think because there was Cleon Skousen, and who was the, didn't he have a brother? But that was The Naked Capitalist? Because
The Naked Capitalist is a review and commentary on Tragedy and Hope.
That's right. That's where most people learned about it back in the day, because the big book was banned.
Yeah, his nephew, Mark Skousen, is the guy that still does the Freedom Fest every year.
Any relation to Joel Skousen?
Yes. Although, I think so. I'm not sure who that is, but the name
Joel Skousen does like the Safest Places to Live book. What's that called? Strategic Relocation. That's his name.
Oh, I'm not sure then.
All right.
I'm really not sure about that.
All right. Well, Scott and Charlie, do you have any questions for our guest before we bid him adieu? Because he's put in a big investment of time already today.
I'm grateful for antiwar.com. We republished quite a few articles over this post. It's a great resource for people.
Yeah, that was a riveting discussion. Just thank you for taking the time with us today. Absolutely.
Well, thank you guys all for having me. And you ever come to Austin?
I come a year usually. Yeah.
I was in Austin, like, I don't know, 13 years ago. I'm bringing up your website now so people can see scotthorton.org. Check this out. This is where you can find those 6,000 interviews, right? Are they all still available?
Yes. If you just click archives at the top there, it'll take you to the full list of the 6,000 right there.
What a nerd. All right. Well, congratulations, Scott, on making it this far. It's a very impressive body of work that you have assembled. It's very useful in this fight for freedom that we are enduring right now at present. And I think it's also very valued in the future, because looking back in history, it is so rare to get such a clean stream of facts without hyperbole, that are congruent and comprehensive and cogent. And that's really what communication is all about. So I think your work's inspiring to all of us, and more power to you, as they used to say back in the day. Where else can we check out your work? Do you have X or Substack, or where else can people see it?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you, man. I really do appreciate that a lot, Richard. And then, I'm at scotthorton.org. scotthortonshow.com is the Substack. And if you sign up there, you can get the first 3 sections of the audiobook of Provoked, which I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but it's already 12 hours just for like the first 2 chapters of the audiobook of Provoked there. That's at scotthortonshow.com. Then amazon.com for the books, and libertarianinstitute.org for my institute. I got a really great group of writers over there, about 20, 25 guys. And including, by the way, like, we're just waiting. I could hit refresh and see on Amazon. We're about to publish a brand new book by the great William Van Wagenen called Creative Chaos, the true story. I'm going to screw up how the CIA did the evil, dirty war for Obama in Syria back 15 years ago.
Wow.
I just screwed up the, subtitle for you. Okay. It's not out yet, but it's like, should be coming out today or tomorrow. We're just like waiting for them to finally, Oh, here it is. I have it. It's Inside the CIA's Covert War to Topple the Syrian Government. That should be, that's going to be our 16th book or 17th book, I think, that we published at the Institute. So that's all at libertarianinstitute.org to find out more about that. And then I think that's it. I can't remember. Oh, I'll tell you what. Here's something I'm doing soon, which is a Scott Horton Academy of Foreign Policy and Freedom. It's my own.
That's part of
Liberty
the Tom Woods Liberty Classroom model, right?
That's right. So Tom built it for me and helped put up the funds to get the thing going. I'm doing 2 gigantic classes. I think so. It's 30 hours on the Middle East, and so far about 40 on the Cold War with Russia and the war in Ukraine, which I'm not done yet. So way overkill on those. But then I've got James Bovard on 40 years of investigative journalism, which is on a bunch of topics, which is just going to be fantastic. I got Ramsey Baroud on Israel-Palestine. I've got William Bupert on how America lost every war since 1945. And I got CJ Kilmer on why Woodrow Wilson is the worst person who ever lived. And that's just to start. Oh, and then there's this other guy whose name I don't know yet. I forget. But Tom recruited this guy who is a biblical scholar who's going to teach about just how phony all the Darbyite, premillennialist, dispensationalism, Christian Zionist stuff is. And how Protestant Christians don't have to believe in that crap.
Well, luckily, that's not a topic that's relevant at all today. Sarcasm fully intended.
I think it's going to do very well. There's a great crack up happening on the right now. And a big part of it has to do with people being promised they're going to get raptured up to heaven if only they support these horrible apocalyptic wars and all these horrific sins and all this grief and violence and pain that's been inflicted on these poor people. And people are just real resentful of that. But like, man, I don't know. I don't think my minister really knows what he's talking about when it comes to that stuff anymore. Like, man, I think the evidence is in. As Douglas McGregor says, time wins more arguments than reason. And you look around now, all that cool stuff that they promised come true? No. So now what? And I think, now is really the time for that. So I'm really excited about it. Should be coming real soon. And this is for the hardcore people who really want to learn this stuff very well. And as you say, be their own producers too. Turn this right around and educate more people to our same ways. That's what we're for here.
Well, thank you so much for dedicating some of your hard-earned time. I've dealt with a variety of fears over the years by facilitating a growth mindset and an anti-fragile mentality. I've learned from mistakes that you haven't even conceived of yet. Now, I can't do it for you, but I can share the resources, the methods, the tools, and inspiration for you to learn how to do it for yourself. And it really is worth learning how to do for yourself because it's a lifelong beneficial skill. It's evergreen. It's never going to tarnish. You're always going to use this. If you're interested in learning more, I host a podcast every Sunday night. We analyze the week's news and help you have non-contradictory views. You actually understand, but you've got to come along for the ride and process the news with us so you have that understanding. I also teach adults twice a year in a 12-week course called AUTONOMY that is aimed at resolving all the problems I just pointed out with the school system and the irrational fears and the replacement of the rites of passage and the methods you need to have a skeleton key in life and a Swiss Army knife so you can have the tools and the access to do whatever you need to do in this world to bring your goals, to bring your dreams and map them to a truthful reality. It is a simple process, but it is not for those who cling to their irrational fears. So I hope if we have lowered the barrier to entry today, if you see a future you that is more realistic and in detail and something you want to strive toward, I recommend you go to getautonomy.info. Check out the offer as far as what we do for people. I want you to know it applies to you. You can learn it. I can teach it. So I want to thank you all for your time and attention. Peace. Who's going to be first off the mute this morning?
I'm glad that I have this course now more than ever. Having a community of people to discuss how to be empowered and autonomous is really necessary and also therapeutic. I'm this much scared about the virus and a lot scared of what's coming down the pipe as a result.
All right, so first off, we're going to get you away from that fear and that stress that I'm sensing. And I want to get you into the practicality of exercising the conversations you're going to need to have.
Have you found that your skills aren't matching up with the challenges ahead? Here are 19 essential skills for success that school never taught you. Get your free copy by following the link below or visit getautonomy.info/19skills.